Welcome back to the Old Turtles podcast, a show about the future of work, the future of health, and the entrepreneurs building that future. I'm Phil Libben, CEO of Old Turtles, and today I'm talking with Tania A, co-founder and CEO of Tellus, about fundraising and about just startup life during the pandemic. Securing funding can be a long and bumpy road, and in many ways, the pandemic has made it even bumpier. But Tellus was able to find success in a bunch of different dimensions. It's actually been really inspiring to see their journey. Today, Tania is going to share some of the key lessons from that process. And we've got with us Tania A, the co-founder and CEO of Tellus. Hey, Tania.
Hey, Phil.
It's great to have you back on this podcast.
I'm very happy to be here.
Tellus is a really cool company that we've had the pleasure of working with for, I guess, a couple of years now. But for people who don't maybe remember you from your last appearance on the podcast, give a quick overview of what is the magic thing that Tellus does.
Absolutely. So Tellus is a device that you plug into the wall. And
I mean, sold. You've got me right there. You've got me at a device that plugs into a wall. I'm writing a check. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And you place it on the wall and you can understand actionable health information about a person in a room from up to 5 meters away from the device. And we're targeting the aging population. It's a population my co-founder and I have a particular care for. We started the company actually out of our own personal experiences looking for technology for our families. And what we realized when we started to dig into this is that the technology hasn't changed and improved much at all in the last 20 years. And so being the technologists and engineers that we are, we decided that we would be the two people to bring something to market that would be better. And our device is better because we don't use wearables and we don't use video cameras. So when I mention this actionable health information, we're receiving all of this really in a passive, private way. And the information we're getting about the elders we look after includes vitals, so heart rate and breathing rate. It includes sleep and wake up patterns, which is particularly important in elder care. It includes falls, so alerts on falls. And really there's much more, but those are the focus areas for right now.
So it's this box that you plug into the wall, and it basically tells you the health status of people in the room, right? It lets you keep elderly people at home and under home care longer, which is kind of a big deal. It's kind of the most important thing that you can do for, I think, improving health outcomes and quality of life.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really an element of health data that we bring to the table with our device, and that's continuous monitoring. A lot of the health information we get is piecemeal and it's point in time. And so a key difference about the data we have is that it's continuous. Of course, I mentioned we have alerts if something goes wrong, and we also really care about only surfacing, important information. So that's like these anomalies that we would see. But I think that's a really important point about what we do. It's this continuous data.
Yeah, and I remember when we first met, when you were telling me about this a few years ago, it really, like, I didn't believe you that it worked, right? This seemed like black magic. You were saying you've got this miniaturized radar that goes into a small box and can auto-magically figure out all of this important health status stuff without without anything that's creepy or privacy violating, because there's no cameras or microphones or things to set up or things to wear. And I knew a little bit about radar and about machine learning, and I thought, yeah, those two things don't go together. That is not literally possible, what you're describing. And it turns out it was possible, and I just didn't know that because I'm old and my information was 5 years older than yours. But you and Kevin managed to build something that literally could not have been made 5 years earlier, right?
That's exactly right. We've seen significant improvements in radar in even the last 3 years since the beginning of when we started Tellus. We've seen our costs go down 10x. The chips are getting better and smaller. And it's a really exciting trajectory for us because we're already at a place where we can really comfortably commercialize our technology with a really decent bill of materials and BOM. So it's exciting.
So here you were, you guys joined Old Turtles, and we were working on making this product. And you describe kind of the stage that you got to kind of right as the pandemic hit. Because I think what we really want to talk about is like how are entrepreneurs and startups adjusting and maybe even thriving in the current environment. So like where were you in, I don't know, January or February of this year, right before everything changed?
Yeah. So actually, in January, I had just come back from spending about 3 months in Tokyo. So helping to get our product off the ground in Japan, which is our target market.
Yeah, because you guys were always building this. Sorry, just right from the
Yeah,
beginning, right? And like the whole idea was to do this in the U.S. and Japan and kind of make it global, which I think is already kind of unusual for for startups.
it is quite unusual for startups, but not unusual if you are interested or targeting the aging and elder care sector.
Yeah,
So Japan is really number one in the world in terms of aging population by proportion. So they're at around 30% of the population is over the age of 65. And as you can imagine, that creates an enormous pressure and social issue in the country. And so there's a lot of incentive for the adoption of new technology. So it's a great market for us on the technology side, but also it's a market where we can have significant impact and really because of this social pressure get to market much quicker than we could anywhere else in the world.
okay, so here you are in January. You just come back from a few months in Japan, lining up the first customers and the first kind of real testing, and things are going pretty well. Hectic, I think, as startups always are. And then what happens? What do you guys start doing when coronavirus starts to become the new reality, and how does it affect you?
Well, it's interesting because I like to think of myself as a pretty good planner. And even in the startup world, perhaps that could be debatable. But in January, I was really thinking that we had around 9 to 10 months of runway and that I wanted to start conversations early with our current investors to see how they would feel about a Series A, something that I wanted to really raise in the next, I'd given myself around 5 months to get this done.
So you previously raised the seed round, and had some runway, and it was like starting to feel like you were going to get ready for the A.
Exactly. And so I just come back from Japan after spending a few months. And a few weeks later, I flew back to Japan in February at the very beginning of coronavirus, once it started getting into the news cycle, and spoke at Docomo Ventures Day. So, NTT Docomo is one of our investors. And every year they have this event for other investors and also their company to showcase the startups that they've been investing in. I believe, Phil, you spoke there last year.
Yeah, I spoke there at some point in the before times, but time has no meaning anymore, so I can't remember if it was last year or much longer.
That trip ended up being really lucky for me and for our company. On that trip, because I was in this mindset of having early discussions with investors, I decided to extend the trip beyond just the conference and spend time with existing investors and also new investors that I, wanted to meet. And so that trip was incredibly lucky. I think I would probably credit a lot of the closing of this round to the luck of that trip and the timing of that trip.
It lets you kind of make some relationships that you think you would have had a harder time making remotely.
I do. I actually, as a founder, I want to meet other founders who are fundraising completely via Zoom without having met an investor face to face before. I think that's incredibly challenging it's certainly possible. But having those meetings in February, right ahead of a global shutdown, really helped to set up a good precedent with the investors, especially the new investors who didn't know me prior.
Yeah, and that's really interesting because this has been one of the things that I've been most concerned about, kind of thinking through how we're going to deal with the pandemic. Is we made the transition to remote work, I think, pretty successfully, just at All Turtles and a few of our projects, and that was okay. That was pretty productive. But I was thinking, well, but we're only working on projects that already were well underway beforehand, so we're not working on anything new. And we like all of the people are people that we already know because we used to all work together physically, and so it's kind of easier. And I was worried about like, well, what would it be like to work on something totally new, to start on something new during the pandemic? Could we do that, or is it only for continuing? And then we did start some new stuff and actually went pretty well, our newest product. But even there, I was thinking, yeah, but even though it's a new product, most of the people working on it are All Turtles people. We've kind of known them before. What's it going to be like when we have to hire completely new people that we've never met before in person? What's it going to be like when we need to raise money from, as you said, investors that we never talked to before? And that was a big test, and so far that's going well. But it's only been a few weeks. Like we have hired our first few new people. Like I, for the first time in my life, have employees that I've never seen in person, that I've never met, and we've raised some money from people that we've never met before. But you're right; it's a weird experience. It's a weird feeling. Do you think this is something that everyone's just going to have to get good at, or do you think we can just kind of hunker down and write it out and go back to the way things were?
I think we're going to have to get really good at this. I'm trying my best. I think everyone really is. We do, as a team, have some advantages to having this Japan go to market because we actually have a team in Japan. So we're quite used to being remote and building a sense of teamwork and community among, right now there are almost 14 of us. But yeah, that's something that we've gotten quite good at. With investors, I think Phil, you could share a lot of advice around that. I think that would be really interesting to hear.
I mean, I think we've been involved now in a bunch of projects and companies fundraising since the pandemic started. I think 7 or 8 All Turtles projects, and they've actually all been successful, which I'm kind of surprised to say because I thought it'd be a bloodbath at the beginning of things, and it actually turns out like no, it's hard, but it's okay. And in some ways, things are easier. In some ways, things are harder. But I guess we were just fortunate to, everything that we were working on, everything that we were involved with, like you guys, like Tellus, like was already pretty compatible with the new world. Like everything already had some aspect of the future of health or the future of work or being remote. And so we were in the fortunate position of having to continue projects and raise money for projects that were compatible with the way the world is set up now and in the future, and not necessarily have to fight against it too much. I think it would have been much harder had we had a bunch of projects that all of a sudden like didn't make sense in a mostly remote world. But yours does, and so how's it gone? How has the
Yeah.
fundraising been?
Well, yeah, it turns out in a pandemic, health technology is something that people are particularly interested in, which was good for us.
Yeah.
And so, in terms of our pitch, it was pretty interesting because I was in Japan in February of this year. I started to pitch Tellus. It was, kind of like an introductory round, meeting new people, meeting with our existing investors. And suddenly in March, there was a global shutdown and everything switched to Zoom and Google Hangouts. Yeah, if there's anything I can say, working on a health technology was certainly a plus. And we started to get even more attention during the fundraise because of that. So I had actually set out to raise $5 million, and we closed our Series A with 7 million. So it was actually better than I had anticipated.
Nice. Congratulations. Yeah. I mean, when I remember, we were talking about this at the beginning of the process, and it was like, well, yeah, things are going to be really hard, but you guys are making a product that helps elderly people be healthy while being remote, kind of from home, it's almost like you couldn't pick a more relevant pitch for the current time. So of course, like on the one hand, it sort of feels like, oh man, we got lucky. We were working on something relevant. On the other hand, like it wasn't luck though. Like you chose to work on this because you knew it was important, and the pandemic maybe made that importance even more acute. But it was important to begin with, and things that were important to begin with, like tend to become even more important when the world is in difficult circumstance, not less so. So maybe it actually isn't so much luck as just like picking worthwhile things.
That's true. And I would say, given the difficulty, it sounds easy to say, oh, well, we raised more than what we expected, but it certainly wasn't an easy journey, the fundraise itself. And so not only should you be working on things that are important problems to solve, you should be working on things that you are genuinely passionate and interested in. I think it would be really difficult to persevere through a fundraise during these times if you don't have that element of excitement about what you're working on. And really, that's because investors are I found them to be more nervous. And so you need to genuinely convey why you are the right founder to solve this problem and why the problem you're solving is important and why your company will be successful. And so that was certainly a big part of the fundraise as well.
Yeah, I think I've always the generic advice that I've always given to this is really when you're pitching to investors is really only three questions that you need to answer. There's only three slides. It's why this, why you, and why now. And that's just generally always true. But I think in the past few months after the COVID pandemic started, it's really been like, no. But seriously, why now? Like why why does this make sense right now? And companies that don't have a good answer to the why now, that are pretending that this never happened, like that's just going to be very difficult. But I think you had a great answer to why now. It made even more sense now than it did 6 months ago. But it's not like you didn't have to change anything. You did change the way that you thought about things and talked about things, and actually what you worked on a little bit because of the pandemic, right? Like how did you have to adapt?
Yeah, well, certainly, we're selling into facilities in Japan right now. And so a big question that came up is, well, during a COVID shutdown, how are you actually going to get into the facilities and how are you going to mobilize Salesforce? And there are some pretty important product decisions that we've made from the very beginning, because we had such a focus, Kevin and I, on the product itself and making it really, really easy to work with and use. That made this a really simple, explanation. And for us on the product side, getting into facilities, most other products on the market have really difficult installation, are really, really expensive, and are difficult to set up for the staff. And by contrast, our technology is, I think I mentioned this in the beginning, you literally just plug it in and place it on a wall. So it's really easy, and we don't require installation teams. We don't require the same things of our competitors. And so that became a really clear point of difference. In fact, in the last 6 months, we've gotten a number of inquiries, more than our team can handle, from facilities all over the world, because of that, because they recognize how easy it is to use our technology and to implement it. And I think that's a really important component of getting into these facilities and selling B2B right now during a pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation. Or you think about like the pandemic is really amplifying things, and so things that are bad, things that are unfair, all of the kind of unbalance and injustice in the world that gets amplified, and like bad situations become worse because the pandemic makes bad things worse. But it also kind of amplifies the good things. It amplifies things the other way. Like if you have a company that's doing worthwhile and important things, or were worthwhile and important before the pandemic, and you haven't taken too many shortcuts. So what you just said, like you're not relying on a very heavyweight sales and installation process because you've like put the work into the product so that it doesn't need to have a big integration arm to install it. And you figured out the distribution, and you're really focused on making it as efficient as possible, then in some ways those become superpowers when the world is in crisis, because those things that were always like a good idea, but they were kind of nice to have, now are a major competitive advantage before. So if you kind of use this lens of, well, we are in heightened times. We are in times that amplify everything. They amplify the good and they amplify the bad. And so how do we just make sure that we take the things that are good and make them as big as possible? I think it's an interesting lens, and I think that's what you've managed to do with the product and with the fundraise. And you made some interesting additions, right, and improvements as well. Like I remember you guys put out a demo just about a month or so into the pandemic, where you were able to tune some of the algorithms to detect health signals that you weren't necessarily looking for before, but that all of a sudden seemed more important. Can you talk about that?
Kevin and I were really curious if we could detect a cough. And we were particularly curious about this because I mentioned that in our product, we can measure health vitals. And when we're measuring the vital signs of heart rate and breathing rate, we're measuring a waveform. And so we actually took one of our engineers, he's one of our machine learning engineers, Srivatsan, and set up our device and wanted to show that we actually could see a pretty significant difference in the waveform when someone is coughing. And so we did actually put out a video to show the potential of these algorithms. And it's currently in R&D. It's something we're really excited to release, hopefully in early 2021.
Yeah, that's great. Well, so as a startup founder, and you've just raised a fresh A round in the midst of the pandemic, which is what a lot of people are trying to do. What have any advice for other people, other founders that are maybe a couple of months behind you, but are on a similar journey? How should they think about this?
Yeah, I think, Phil, you're one of the first people I talked to when things started to happen in the world. And
That's
the
just
advice,
mostly because of my soothing radio voice, though.
you have a really good radio voice. I'm jealous.
This is my hidden talent. I should, if I ever need like a real job, I should consider radio.
Should call NPR. I called you, and your advice was, hey, this is unprecedented. So act quickly. And I called one other person, Heidi Roizen, who you know as well. She's a mentor of mine and also an investor, who gave me the same advice. I've lived through this a couple times over: stock market crash, financial crisis. Be quick. Don't sit and wait and let your pride get in the way of getting the deal done. And I think that was really important advice. Firstly, because I trust both of you as founders and former founders. Actually, you're still a founder, Phil, impressively. And secondly, it's true because it was such a unprecedented moment in history, early March, that there really isn't that much time you have. Because the truth is, in the beginning, at least, investors were really, really nervous. And so, sure, I had really good luck visiting investors in February, but it's pretty maybe bad luck to be pitching them again in March. And so I had to take, what I had and really run with it and persevere for a couple of months through a lot of questions, a lot of nervous sort of investors to get to a point where, we closed. So I think having urgency to get the deal done, but also patience, in making sure that you don't give up, essentially, even if people are investors are nervous. I think that's really important. That would be my first piece of advice.
Yeah, I think, and like getting the sense of timing. This so earlier on in life, I used to skydive. It's not something that most people know, but yeah, I used to skydive, and I made a very specific choice for why skydiving was going to be my thing. It's because I'm completely uncoordinated, as anyone who has actually seen me in person knows. I don't know anything about sports of any kind, and well, most of my friends in my 20s, they would talk about skiing and other stuff they were doing, and I always felt bad because I didn't do anything. And so I thought, all right, I need to find an activity that requires no skill and is totally safe. but that seems kind of badass. And so I kind of did my research, and I'm like, skydiving. It's like you literally don't have to do anything. You just fall, and you don't freak out, and everything is fine. And it seems like you've actually accomplished something. So it's like impressive bragging rights. I started skydiving, and it's super fun. And a friend of mine was a skydiving instructor. And I remember talking to him once at the range, and he was telling the story of how he became a skydiving instructor. So, to become a skydiving instructor, first you have to be a really good skydiver. You go through lots of training, lots of lessons, and then you train on how to be a trainer. And then at some point, you're already an instructor, and you're like giving lessons, but you're going to get tested. And I guess the way that they test it is once in a while you get someone who pretends to be a student, but is actually testing you. And so he told the story where he was, he had this guy show up, and he wanted to be a student. And so they do the day-long class. This is part of a program called Accelerated Freefall, where you don't jump tandem, you just jump kind of with an instructor, but not attached to anyone right from the first jump, which is what I would do. And so this guy comes, says, he's a total beginner. He's a student. He's going through the whole 8-hour class, and, he's learning how to do everything, and he's making all the same kind of rookie mistakes. And, my friend trains them, and then they get on their first jump, they get on the plane, and these are these kind of medium-sized cargo planes with all the chairs taken out. So you just sit on the floor. There's like maybe a dozen people can kind of fit on the floor. So it's just the skydiving instructor, my friend, and his alleged student. The student is kind of nervous, and they're sitting there, and they sit on the floor of the plane. There's not too many other people on this jump. And the plane takes off, and you jump out at roughly 14,500 feet is when you're supposed to jump out. And it gives you time to do stuff. And it takes a while for the plane to get to that altitude. It takes a good half hour. So you're basically sitting on the floor of this plane, making small talk for a half hour, being nervous. And they're sitting there on the floor, and the student is sitting there, and all of a sudden the plane is about, it's at about 8,000 feet. So it's about halfway up. The guy who's the student just like stands up all of a sudden and yells, "I go now," and just runs out of the plane. Just like opens the door and jumps out. "I go now," jumps. And my friend, he can't think. He has to go. Like his job is he has to just go right now. He has to go right now with this guy. Like the guy just stood up and said, "I go now," ran out the plane. And so that's what you got to do as an instructor, because otherwise you fail your exam. Obviously, this guy's not a student. So yeah, he's like, I didn't even think about it. Like the next thing I knew, I was outside the plane, like catching up with this guy, making sure that he was okay. And then, and then it was all fine. And to me, that's like the "I go now" moment. It's like, yeah, usually it's okay. You can be laid back, you can sit around, you can chat, but like once in a while, you're like, "I go now. This is it. This is the timing." And I think we had that moment in the world. And, and we're going to have more of them. But I think you reacted correctly when that came. And luckily, everything worked out, luckily, and through a great amount of work on your and Kevin and the rest of your team's part.
Yeah, I certainly had an "I go now" moment when it came to the fundraise.
Yeah. I remember that conversation. It was probably a couple of conversations, but it was literally like, we got to make some decisions, and you kind of got to make them today.
Yeah.
And a lot of people freeze. That's kind of the one thing that you shouldn't do if you're going to skydive. It doesn't actually require much skill, but it does require never freaking out and freezing. As long as you kind of keep your head about you, it'll be fine. And yeah, this is. I think this may have been my only and first ever sports metaphor that I've used on this podcast, or athletic pursuit metaphor. So I'm sure I got that all wrong. Yeah. Well, Tania, thank you so much. I am really proud to be along on this journey with you guys and with Tellus, and to have All Turtles helping you out. I think you're doing something that the world really needs, and you're doing it well. And I'm glad that you are succeeding in the face of the pandemic. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. And thanks for sticking by our side and for believing in us. We're really lucky to have a few really incredible investors who, really supported us through this round, who were in our seed. And that includes University of Tokyo, who led our round, and Case, Ide, and you, Phil, and a few others. And I'm really grateful to be in this position. So thanks for everything.
It's a good team. It's been our honor. This podcast is a production of the All Turtles Worldwide Media Empire. We recorded this episode at a variety of world-class, at-home California studios. Thanks to Tania for joining us. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future episodes, send us an email to hello@all-turtles.com. Marie reads every message. Thanks to everyone who made this episode possible, including Jim Metzendorf for editing, Marie McCoy-Thompson for producing, Chris Plogue for his audio expertise, Micah Rivera for our artwork, and Matt Emmerman for our theme music. It's really fun reading these credits. I haven't done this in a while. I like reading the closing credits. On behalf of Jessica Collier, John Cifuentes, and yours truly, Phil Livin, and the rest of the Old Turtles team, thanks for listening.